Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment you are going to hear the voice of a man who will tell you some tremendously important facts, some amazing facts. The voice of a man who has made a discovery that is revolutionizing human thought.
Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I have another special day, the one and only RJ Spina. RJ is here to talk about his amazing new book, Access Superconsciousness. We have gotten a chance to talk about the last two books that RJ has published, but this one breaks absolute new ground, and RJ really comes out of his comfort zone a little bit and writes about accessing superconsciousness. Now, for many of you, you may say, oh, that sounds like a sort of generic title, and oh, I know what's going to be in it. No, you don't. This is not what you expect. When you open it up, we really get a detailed idea of what superconsciousness is and what the opposite of it is. And we understand these polarities and how to work with them. But just the process of reading it, sharing his client stories, you learn about how you have energetic attachments and projections and all kinds of wonderful things that you can literally raise your frequency to overcome any obstacle. So I had to talk to RJ about it. It was just published. Welcome back to the Reality Revolution, RJ.
Thank you for having me, my friend. It's always a pleasure when we get together. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so you're getting into the groove. As what I can tell in the first two books, you've gotten really comfortable writing for nonfiction. Spiritual work is a unique genre, and you kind of have to, a lot of writers hide behind their characters and they can do whatever they want, but for what you're doing, you have to sort of be naked and show everybody who you are and tell your stories about yourself, and it's a difficult genre to write for. Believe me, I know. So tell me about your progression and what inspired you to move from where you've been so far, which is change your mind, and then accessing super healing, and then moving on to accessing super consciousness.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it was a natural progression, but I have to say that the order in which I wrote these books are not the order in which they're coming out. Now, they're coming out, I think, perfectly in terms of Supercharged Self-Healing, Change Your Mind, and now Access Superconsciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But Brian, I wrote Supercharged Self-Healing first. Book 4, which doesn't come out till January of 2026,
Mm-hmm.
was the second book I wrote. The third book I wrote was Change Your Mind. The fourth book I wrote was Access Superconscious. So it's in terms of how it's being released to the general public, it's perfect because each one, Supercharged and Change Your Mind, we kind of discovered, one, how to put yourself back together in terms of your healing. Change Your Mind, how to remove any kind of limiting beliefs that you have in your subconscious, and how to manage your, what I call our energy bank account. But as you're alluding to, Access Superconsciousness, it's not the next level. It's 20 levels. Yeah, it's 20 levels past. And there's no way we could have started off, let's say, with Access Superconsciousness. We needed to work with the foundation of the ego, mind, identity, the body, the I am, the self, frequencies and dimensions, and then we can build upon that. And Access Superconsciousness, one way that we can sum it up, Brian. So we learned in the first two books what the human false character is, or the lower consciousness, the outer personality. We learned how to deconstruct that. We learned how to put ourselves back together. We've also learned how to remove all limiting programs that we have identified ourselves with, also that have been indented upon our body of energy. Superconsciousness is not accessing your higher mind. Accessing superconsciousness is accessing the higher mind of your higher self. And this is where the superhuman is born. This is where there literally are no limitations. This is how we can move right through a dualistic environment, right, wrong, good, bad, right? How to move right through this and be able to access all of what we have been, all of what we are, and all of what we will ever be. And that's why the 24 teachings in there each have an accompanying meditation. So there's 24 meditations, because giving information, as you know, Brian, is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
There must be a prescriptive nature, so the reader or participant has the tangible experience themselves. And that, the tangibility of the experience, is the evolution of consciousness. It's not just taking in information. So this book, from my perspective, is my favorite book that I've written. And then when book 4 comes out, I'll tell you that book 4 is my favorite book that I've ever written. But I really mean, out of the first 3, Access Superconscious is near and dear to my heart, because it does take humanity to levels that it has not hasn't been privy to. And just as you said, I was very, very personal in this book, very, very personal. I talked about things that were extraordinarily difficult in terms of my lifetime as RJ. And I talked about instances or moments or experiences that I had. I picked 4 or 5 of them in the first chapter. These experiences changed my life completely. And it's my hope and it's my desire that by the reader reading them, it'll change their life too.
You shared a fascinating story about when you were younger and you had to share a room with your sister and you sort of started leaving your body. I'd like to share that story with everybody and kind of give you some access of what you went through early on. It's sort of set the tone for what would happen later.
Yeah, my earliest memories, Brian, as RJ, or when I was outside of my body. And it wasn't like I was trying. I mean, I was a little kid. I wasn't trying to do this, right? So it would happen just upon relaxation. And oftentimes it would happen when I would getting close to falling asleep in that very, very relaxed state. And then all of a sudden, I would literally be, my consciousness would literally be standing beside my bed, looking at my body, or I'd wake up on the ceiling. And this became normal. I mean, this was daily. And it actually even started to become multiple times a day. Sometimes I would sit, there was a chair in our family room that was just super comfortable. And every time I sat in, I just felt this deep sense of relaxation. And before I knew it, I was literally out of my body. So this was normal and natural for me to do this. And that was really the beginning of me exploring consciousness, even as a little kid. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just doing it naturally. It wasn't until I developed enough of an intellect to reverse engineer this process of what we would call astral projection, but it's actually really beyond astral projection. So now this is part of what I teach, but these are my earliest memories, is of leaving my body and looking down at my body and starting to begin to literally ascend the frequencies and start to experience all these different realms and interact with beings that were oddly familiar.
Now you mentioned the higher self. Give me your concept and definition of the higher self.
Okay, so if it was closer to me, I would grab it because I like props. So I was going to grab the octopus. So I can always use the octopus as an example. Okay, so what you and I are, everyone here, right? We are an aspect or a soul. And it's my direct experience through doing this thousands and thousands of times, is that it's almost like a tentacle of an octopus. So we are this, about 2.5%. We are this projection of this much larger being. And this much larger being is known as our higher self, the Godhead, what I call our totality. They're the same thing, just different words describe the same thing. So our higher self is every incarnation that we've ever been, every incarnation that we are concurrently, and every incarnation that we will ever be. It is our totality. And it's a much, much larger being or body of sentience and energy. And this higher self, it moves up the multiversal structure based upon its own evolutionary content. So if we think about you get in an elevator, and sometimes you need a key fob to go up and down. So the key fob of the multiverse is sentience. So you get to move as far as you want based upon how sentient you are. And through the projecting of me or you, a soul, into the lower frequencies, the higher self puts itself into like stasis. And then all its projections are doing learning on its behalf. Because every time the higher self projects some of its sentience and energy, it drops down a little bit. It's like a balloon losing air. So it can only project up to 30% of itself at any one given moment. And then all those tentacles, all those souls or aspects you or I are learning. And because we are an aspect of our higher self, the higher self is learning. So the higher self is a gigantic body of sentience and energy, and that you and I are about a 2.5% projection of this much larger being.
I want to bounce this off you because I was originally inspired by the law of one, and for your own perspective, because I really tried to, after I started having multiversal experiences, I really tried to seek out my higher self, to connect to my higher self. I'd read a lot of channelings and I felt like they were really channeling their higher self. And so based on what the law of one would say, at first, when I contacted the higher self, it almost felt like it was a conscious sentient version, but there's still more. Like that there's a version of us that left the higher self to take care of us and then is already moving on. And then what I would figure out, it's that this higher self was me, of course, that had already experienced everything, that already knew, and just like Back to the Future, I could go back and change my past. Like the higher self couldn't directly intervene unless I asked. I had to be very clear about that, and would not intervene if it wouldn't help, but was there always protecting me, even when I didn't know I needed the protection, just kind of like this entity, right? And then as I started to commune and talk with my higher self, I realized that this higher self was just one of many higher selves, and that there was like another quantum higher self at an even higher level that was like a grouping of all my higher selves from all the different realities. Does that make sense to you? Am I crazy?
Well, all of us are a projection from our individual higher self. There are billions of higher selves, billions. And we are a projection of one single higher self. So I think what you're probably starting to experience, or what the term that's been used is oversoul. So sometimes what happens is when we keep incarnating over and over again, and we tend to work with the same souls, believe it or not, we tend to work with the same souls repeatedly because we're familiar with them, and we're more likely to take on challenges with souls that we're familiar with. It's like picking someone at work to do a project with. You're going to pick someone that you like working with and you worked with before because you figure you do a good job. So it's a silly analogy, but it's almost like the same thing. So we actually start to develop oversouls. So an oversoul would be almost a connectivity point between, let's say, your higher self and another higher self and another higher self and another higher self of higher selves of other souls that you have worked with. So there is this myriad of connectivities. So we only have one individual higher self, like one tentacle only belongs to one octopus. That one tentacle doesn't belong to many octopi. But because of the interactions that we do repeatedly with other souls, we develop connectivity. And that connectivity actually starts to become higher self-like, but technically it's not a higher self, but it's like a connective membrane. And I think that's kind of what you're probably starting to experience. It's this connective membrane that is between your higher self and another higher self. So that's probably what was going on, but each one of us have our own higher self, one tentacle coming from the same octopus.
Right.
If that makes sense.
No, that makes, so the higher self knows what's going to happen. It's from the future. It knows what's going to happen, knows all the different possibilities. So when you're interacting, there's a knowledge, like if you do this, it's going to lead a certain way. They don't necessarily tell you what to do, but they have knowledge of it that you can sort of access, right?
Complete. So this is exactly. So this is what I mean about superconsciousness. So when we start to work with the teachings in this book, we are going to let in a supreme intelligence into our life that is so far beyond the intellect. It's not fathomable, the difference between the logic and linearity program of the lower consciousness in comparison to the super consciousness of our own higher self that is actually, just as you said, already has experienced everything else. It already actually understands everything. It's understood it, and now it's projecting a piece of itself to actually live it out, to act it out. If that, all the words are stage, right? To actually have the experience of the scripted movie that's already taken place, which I know for the finite mind is like, what? But that's exactly what's going on. There is no past, present, or future when you're outside of space-time. And so the super consciousness, the higher self, is beyond past, present, and future. It's all complete. It's all done. It's just experiencing myriad aspects of itself by projecting pieces of itself into what we would call space-time to have this experience. But the wisdom, the knowledge, it's almost all knowing. And that's what superconsciousness is. It's a supreme intelligence that will change everyone's life drastically the moment they're able to connect with it.
So you chose to help bring out our connection to the superconsciousness by really focusing on contrasts, the different sort of contrasts throughout each of the chapters, as well as the meditations and techniques. You focus on separateness to oneness, attachments to freedom, disorder to order, ignorance to wisdom, violence to kindness, resentment to forgiveness. So what inspired you to really focus on those contrasts? Because as I was reading it made more sense. You really can't understand forgiveness without understanding resentment and the path between those two. So explain to me, for instance, why that was the way you constructed this book.
Yeah. So I wanted to give the treasure map for how to move through the dualistic nature of the lower frequencies of the physical universe. So the only way to move through, from my perspective, my direct experience and perspective, is to actually offer up just what you were saying, disorder to order. So what's disorder like? And what is order like? Right? Now, how do we move through that? And that's what these teachings are about, because the finite mind sees things as this or that.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, right? So we get caught in this dualistic nature. Now, in order to move through this experience with grace, with the greatest efficacy of evolution of consciousness, with the greatest quality of life, that I found that if we could take, just like we were talking about, if we can take disorder, most of us know what disorder is, and then we can start to pinpoint what order actually is, and then have a meditation or teaching that allows us to go right through the dualistic experience and go right past it and through it. And we can only do that by accessing the superconsciousness, which is almost like this all-knowing state. But by giving us the over here and over here, right, we can embrace the dualistic nature of the experiences that we have by living through the finite mind. And then we can go well beyond that by understanding what is it that takes place for us to move right through the dualistic nature from disorder to order, and then right through it, above it, and beyond it.
So what would be the most, you have them in order as well. Each of them are the different contrasts are important to break through in their orders, right? So you start with separateness to oneness and you end with desire to stillness. What is the most important aspect of actually entering into that super consciousness when I'm looking at all of these different factors?
The single most important thing is to learn how to be present, because it all starts with being present.
Mm-hmm.
So that's number one. And that's why, as you can see in those meditations, many of the beginnings of the meditations start off with an instantaneous meditation magic trick. So we can become present in 1 second. Now, the key is to start from there, to start from being present. So if we start from being present, the conditioned mind, the brainwashed, conditioned, fragmented, compartmentalized, MK Ultra mind is not present. So what that means is the real you is here now. And we must operate from that foundation. We can't start from the ego mind because it's inauthentic. It's like building a house with a terrible foundation. The whole thing is going to come down eventually. So we have to start with the ability to be present. So the real you is now online. And then from there, we go through this process of the meditation to take us right through it. So the number one thing is not necessarily separateness to oneness or disorder to order, etc. The number one thing is our ability to be present, because that's the only time the real you or me is actually here now.
And some of these techniques are so much fun. Like, for instance, the puppeteer meditation, where you imagine that you're a puppet and that there's no puppeteer. And so just ponder that for a couple of seconds, and suddenly something starts to happen, like with your body and your mind. You start to realize, that you have been a puppet, but there is no puppeteer. It's an interesting. So each one of these are almost questions, almost metaphors or parables, ways of you just an analysis that doesn't take very long. Like you said, it doesn't take you like 30 minutes. It takes you just a moment to really ponder on, and suddenly you're unlocking this unique aspect of your consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. There's none of those and there's 24 of them. None of those meditations, as you know, Brian. I mean, these are done in minutes. This is not,
Minutes.
check back in 90 minutes or something. This is because we're dealing directly with the one true concrete reality. We're going directly to that. So we're operating from the driver's seat of the miracle machine. And that's really the point. Now, all of these things, all of these teachings, tenets of self-mastery and eternal truths, they are accessible within the self in these, we'll call it exalted states of consciousness, where there's authentic communion and connectivity with the higher self and with God. And this inner knowingness just literally consumes and swallows up the finite mind. And the finite mind is gone. So I can remember when we could say these things were, these remembrances of these understandings were coming back to me. And so as these things were coming back to me, I was like, how can I capture this? What is the way to do this? So one, it was to get to this supreme state of consciousness, then understand tangibly what is actually happening, and then allow one to come all the way back into the ego mind identity. So I would reverse engineer. So as strange as it sounds, I would start off in the exalted state of consciousness and actually see my mind, what starts to happen as I come all the way back, as my consciousness collapses and my energy starts to constrict, and all of a sudden I'm back into body consciousness. So I would reverse engineer what it's like to go from this greatly expanded state of consciousness all the way back down. And that's actually how I came up with the 24 meditations, to then take from the ego mind identity to get to be present. And then we go through this process to get into these supreme states of consciousness.
Now, you talk about this on your channel and your books, but let's talk about the ego mind identity and what that means. I noticed recently you mentioned that it's like an AI. Your ego mind is like an AI. Explain what the ego mind is, how we can sort of understand it, and when we're working with our consciousness. Because I think a lot of times what we think the ego mind is isn't necessarily what it is.
Yeah. Okay. So ego mind identity. And from a purely physics standpoint, EMI also stands for electromagnetic interference. Ego mind identity also stands for, from a purely physics perspective, electromagnetic interference. So what is that? So electromagnetic interference is everything that is broadcast here that is not our true signal. And so we get misaligned to this false signal, which creates the false character. And so when I say everything that's broadcast here, beliefs, concepts, roles, ideologies, and so-called knowledge, none of those things, if you added them all together, it wouldn't add up to one I am. The I am is infinite and contains everything. So what we end up doing is constricting our consciousness and collapsing our energy to fit this fractal of God into these tiny little things that are not who and what we really are. So the ego mind identity is our human character. It's not who and what we are. The human character is given birth through the I am. But just as the painter is not the painting, we are not the creation. We are not the incarnation. We are what gives birth to the incarnation. So for us to return to what, not a who, for us to return to what we really are, we need to be able to work with ourself with the capital S directly. And that's what accessing superconsciousness really allows us to do. So the ego mind identity is who we think we are and how we feel about ourselves, and that gets projected out into the world. Meanwhile, the real you, or the real me, is beyond thought, is beyond concept, it's beyond seeking. It precedes and exceeds all seeking. What we actually are is formless, free, and unconditioned. And it's by returning to that do we tangibly start to understand who we are. And at that moment, when we tangibly start to feel these things, Brian, it's clear that we're not our human character. We're not the concepts. We're not the roles. We're not the ideologies. We're not the body. And once we start to have that experience, this is when liberation takes place. And this is the beginning of authentic cosmic consciousness.
It goes beyond just egotistical, because sometimes people will take egotistical and they think that that's what ego means. Oh, I'm being my ego. No, it goes beyond that. It's consciousness. It's the consciousness of yourself and your body and what your consciousness of as you identify yourself, right?
Yeah.
That it goes beyond just whether or not you're selfish or not, which I get a lot of people that misunderstand the ego concept.
Yeah. The ego will tell you you're too good for this, and it'll also tell you you're not good enough.
Right.
Okay. So the foundation of the ego mind identity, the very foundation of it is misidentification with the body. So as soon as you misidentify this free, formless, infinite being that is really just a wave of sentient energy, once we start to misidentify ourselves with the body, we're of course going to misidentify ourselves with what the body perceives and creates: thoughts, emotions, bodily sensations, the experiences that the body has. So if we start to add all and so-called knowledge, which are all just beliefs, knowledge is simply a string of justified beliefs, which are really just a string of thoughts, and we're not our thoughts. So it's rather obvious we're none of these things. Upon any kind of level of detachment, we would see that all of this is an illusion. We are misidentifying ourselves with what is temporary, because what we are is immortal. So once we start to really understand the ego mind is not just someone who's full of themselves and not just someone who doesn't think anything of themselves, the ego mind identity does have to do with thoughts. What we are exists prior to thought, prior to emotion, prior to the body, therefore prior to the experiences that the body has. Once we start to touch that, once we start to tangibly, not mentally understand, Brian, it's not good enough to mentally understand anything. We're not our thoughts. Mm-hmm. It must be this, as you know, this tangible, felt sense recognition. And that's what the teachings and meditations actually give us. And then we can experience our true self, and then we can experience our higher self, and then we can experience the higher mind of our higher self.
And the exciting thing about this book is that it's not something that's a long path that we can reach after 30 years. It's something that you can do literally right now. It doesn't require weeks and weeks of practice and effort. It's not something that's difficult or hard. It's something that you repeatedly show that you can access in this moment right now, and you make it easy. It's not hard. A lot of times people will treat consciousness and enlightenment and self-realization as this difficult chore, this task that they have to do. That's how they outline it in their minds. I got to work on this. They think of it like hard work, right?
Yeah, it's the opposite, because we are real. All of us have always been, are right now, and forever will be the embodiment of these teachings. We already are it. We always have been it. We always will be it. It's just that our attention is on something else. And if something is not tangible and immediate, it's not the truth. And that's one surefire way of know that you're working with something that has been mastered, is that it's immediate. It's not some circuitous, long, drawn out. That's just mental machinations. That's not self-mastery. That might be someone trying to figure it out, but there's nothing to figure out because we're already it. A dog doesn't have to try to be a dog. It's a dog. We don't have to try to be ourselves. We are ourselves. All our effort is in trying to be something and someone that we're not. So simplicity is the height of sophistication. It's a telltale a sign of mastery. And these teachings are masterful teachings that allow all of us, just as you said, to experience these things in moments. Now, let me just add to that. The reason why we can do this now, Brian, and I always use Master Yogananda, Paramahansa Yogananda as an example, who could have taught anything. So he taught, in general, he taught Kriya Yoga. That was his thing, to bring Kriya Yoga to the West. Okay, so why did Paramahansa Yogananda do that? It's because at the time, and he left his body in 1951, at the time, the base frequencies of humanity were lower. So what does that mean? It means to get into a meditative state, one had to go through the physicality of the body. One had to put ones in all these different poses. It's almost like meditation for the body, because we had to go through the body first, because the base frequencies are lower and we were more identified with the gross physical. So Master Yogananda knew that, and so this is why he taught Kriya Yoga. Now, the base frequencies are higher, So I can come here and teach instantaneous meditation magic tricks. I can teach instantaneous connectivity to the higher mind of the higher self because the base frequencies of humanity are higher. So it's exactly like you said. We can work with ourselves in a more elevated way faster because we're able to, because the frequencies are higher and we're able to work with ourselves in a more higher frequency way.
So I'd love to talk about duality, which is kind of what you're showing here, that it seems like the frequency that we're at, the density that we're living within is designed around duality. Are there other, first of all, before we go into that, is the next level a triality? Is there where we start to deal with quadralities? I mean, why does everything have to be a duality, good and evil, and us transcending it on some level? Everything is so simplistic, and everything around us appears to be male, female. Everything is a duality. Why? And what is the reasoning for that? And how does it affect our consciousness? And is there another consciousness where we can start to deal with something more complicated than just a duality, right?
Yeah. Okay. You asked a lot there. Okay. So is there, let me go to next level, or, however you want to say
Yeah.
it. Okay. So there is absolute existences, realities, states of consciousness, realms, however you want to say it. And I've worked and just swim in this kind of stuff. So I've absolutely experienced realms and states of being where 1 + 1 is 17. That's like, well, what does that mean? Okay. So what it means is, in the more elevated frequency and elevated state of consciousness, we simply are aware of more of the possible possibilities. That's the shortest way I can answer that. Okay. So why is everything duality? Because we're as low as we can get. So for us, all we have is this or that.
This or that.
That's it. We got that. We got just a good, bad, right, wrong, positive, negative. Now here, that's what it seems like all we got. When we use body consciousness, the body is attuned to and part of the local environment. So now we're reducing to this fractal of God, to the tiny little bandwidths of frequencies that come in through our 5 very mediocre senses. So all we really have here is this or that. When the truth of the matter is, there's infinite possible possibilities available right now, but we can't access it through a physical sensory perception. And then therefore, that's the data stream that forms the intellect. And that intellect is bound by logic and linearity. Logic and linearity is about this much of how things actually work. Now, when we're here, it's the only way that the brain, our human brain, processes things. So as we move up in frequency, we're going to start to see more of the infinite possible possibilities that have always been there, but by using body consciousness, we can't access it. And hence, as we move up and ascend the frequencies, 1 + 1 isn't 2. 1 + 1 is 17.
Right. And it's exciting because your book is really outlining that us moving beyond these dualities. And in particular, I really was drawn to the anger and compassion, maybe because I'm going through that a little bit, it's what I see in the world. So I wanted to talk about that in particular. I know that in some ways that's an obstacle for my consciousness. I get angry. I get angry with what I see in the world. I get angry at stuff I shouldn't get angry about. And sometimes I find it hard to be compassionate when it's obvious I should be. And I'm just becoming aware of that. So I'd like for you to talk about that aspect of accessing super consciousness.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that when you said should
is a clear word that I shouldn't be using. I should
you
not.
You shouldn't be using should. Yeah, right. So okay. So as you know, Brett, there are no shoulds, right? So what we're seeing, because there really are, we just talking about 1 + 1, in higher states is actually 17. Okay. What we're really seeing is the totality of possible possibilities that people are availing themselves of. So many people are making choices, decisions that, let's say, for example, Brian, if you're the one that's experiencing the anger, or whoever's going to watch and listen, you're experiencing the anger, right? Okay. So we're watching people avail themselves of choices that we might not make that choice. We, quote unquote, we wouldn't do that. But the thing is that that's got nothing to do with it.
Right.
Now, if we can remove, and which that is our ego mind. That's what that is. That is our ego mind. So if we remove the ego mind with the shoulds and should nots, and I would never do that, and I'm upset that people are treating each other this way. I'm upset. I get it. But I promise you, whatever someone is going through, it's because they absolutely need to. And we have this is going to be very controversial for people. Be very careful who you help, because you're going to be interfering with their karma.
Yeah. So should we ask people if we're going to be of service to someone? Should we get into the habit of, would you like me to be of service, of asking permission?
Okay. I went through a phase in my life.
Yeah.
I don't know if this was in the book. Maybe it's in the fourth book. I don't know. I can't remember anymore. Okay. So I'll relay a story. So this was a long time ago. I was in my 20s. So, I'm old. Brian, you and we're not young anymore. Okay. So I was in my 20s.
You speak for yourself.
Okay. All right. Right. I knew you were going to correct me. Okay. I was in a grocery store one time.
Right.
I think I was like 20, like 26 or 27 is what it feels like. So anyway, I was young.
Back in the 90s.
Back in the 90s. So I was in the grocery store, and I wasn't trying to log into someone. Sometimes when you're in a very calm state, just for me, things just open up and I just start to tap into the stuff. So there was a woman in front of me in the grocery store, online. I don't know this woman, just waiting online, right? And I'm just looking at her, and I was just able to look through her. And I could see she had cancer, and it was getting nasty. It was starting to develop. And I could also tell that she had no idea. I could absolutely tell that her consciousness, her lower consciousness, was completely unaware. Her higher mind was the one that actually put that there. And that's a whole nother conversation. But her ego mind had no clue that she was getting ill. I mean, she was already ill, actually. And I knew she was clueless about it. So, like my own ego mind, I need to tell her. I mean, because I can do all these things. Yeah. Let me just tell her what's going on. So I did. I literally said, I know you don't know me, but I have these abilities, and I can tell that you have cancer, and you're going to need to do this and that. You better hurry up. She looked at me and said, "Who the F are you?"
Right.
I never, ever overstepped my bounds again, because me butting in is my ego mind. Again, we got to be careful who we help, because we might be interrupting their karma. And I have never, ever forgotten that. And I have never just knocked on someone's door or gone up, "Hey, let me tell you about all these things I know, and because you need the help." I don't do that. If someone wants help, they come to you. Now that's their free will. Now, when someone says, "Brian, help me," "RJ, help me," totally different. Share the love and share the wisdom. That's it. But if they don't do that, I stay out of it completely and utterly. It's not our place. And it's only the ego mind. Half the time, this will also be hard for people to hear. Half the time that we feel this compulsion, whether we get angry or I have to do something, it's because we are so uncomfortable with being helpless that we actually jump to take action. We could just sit with that. If we could sit with, as we're watching things on television, something traumatic taking place on this planet, right? That feeling of helplessness, right? Sit with it rather than think that you have to act on it. And what we'll learn is beyond what we would learn through actually taking action, because we can't stand the feeling of helplessness.
I often say that we're in a playground of love. We're learning lessons of love, the complexities of love. And so what I'm learning is there's another dichotomy between indifference and compassion at the same time, just as much, and so I go back and look at times when I'm indifferent to suffering that is around me, and then I look back and then I look at times when I make it an intention. I want to be of service and really get outside of myself and see if I can help people, because it makes me feel good. And then I'm suddenly given these opportunities where people come into my field, and I'm still having that thought, am I hurting this person by helping them? It's a tough call. I don't quite know what to do, but at the same time, I think I'm being tested. I feel like when I'm walking out, it's a test. Like, what should I be doing in this case? If this person is me and I'm in the oneness, then of course I'm gonna make sure that they have some money to eat. I'm going to make sure that they that somebody can take care of them. They need a ride. I'm going to give them a ride. But I need to ask them first. I mean, it's why does it have to be like I agree with that, because I know I've had similar situations where I've offered an service and offered love to people, and clearly it hurt them. It did not help them. So it's not black and white in that particular case.
No, it's case by case, and you have to use your intuition. It's case by case, and you have to use your intuition without question. I would say that a lot of the natural compulsion that we all have is to be, because it's all one thing. So it's natural for us to want to share our love and wisdom without question. But that often gets hijacked by the egoic mind, and it gets twisted. And then we then insert ourselves in a situation where no one asked. And then we are right. Then that's really what I'm talking about. And that's why it has to be, has to be case by case. It's never, oh, never ever offer to help. That's not what I'm saying. And it's not always offer to help either. It's neither one of those. We have to read intuitively. And that's like that statement about that lady said, who the F are you? Right? It's like, I learned everything in that moment. It's like, I'm never going to just do that. That was my ego mind that was doing that. And once we learn to work with that feeling, as we're seeing chaos and trauma, as we're seeing it, well, that's happening for a reason. It has to happen. It's like a detox. We're going through a spiritual detox. You know what, when you do a detox, I know, but it's messy, right? Okay. That's what this is. This stuff's all coming up. Why? Because it has to. That's why. Because we can't move past what we don't understand. And if we can control our compulsion, when we start to feel this helplessness, and I have to do something, I have to be of service. Believe me, no one feels that any more than I do. I promise you, right? But I've sat with it. I have sat with it. And the actions that I was taking prior to that lady who set me straight in the grocery store, the actions I was taking prior to that was this natural compulsion was getting hijacked. The natural compulsion to share, to love, to share wisdom was getting hijacked by my ego mind. And my ego mind told me it was okay to insert myself and alter someone's free will. And I was like, you know what? I'm not doing that again. Now, have I ever, since then, have I ever offered help to someone who didn't ask me for help? Yes, without question. But it's intuitive. It's not, I'm of service, I have to do this.
Right.
I don't feel that way. So, and hopefully this conversation that we're having will help a lot of people start to differentiate between these two things. Compassion is by being fully present. It's not necessarily a doing. Right? Think about like when you're not feeling well, right? I mean, what do you want from your wife? You know, you're like, just be here with me. Just be here. Just hold my hand. Just be here. That's all, right? It's not like I want you to go do this, go do this, go do this. It's the opposite. Just be here with me now. And that's not a doing this. And when we become a little more comfortable, when that feeling of helplessness arises, just use this conversation. Everyone who's watching, use this conversation to sit with that and actually watch what happens. You actually will start to emanate love and compassion, and you won't let your ego mind grab a hold of it and think that you must serve and insert yourself in a situation where you were never invited to insert yourself into.
It seems like whenever we talk, there's at least one Neville Goddard mentioned. So I'm going to mention his discussion, because he has this exact discussion in one of his books, and they ask him, you know, he's saying that you can affect somebody. They don't even have to know about it. You can imagine for them. You see somebody that's overweight and unhealthy at the grocery store, and you can imagine that person that they're healthy and they're glowing and vibrant and happy. And you in the I am presence, you see their I am presence. You don't have to say a word to them. And his test was, would I want this for myself? Would I want this job? Would I want this for myself? Because that is me. So I'm not, you know, distracting their karma, because that is me. So the real test is I go within and say, do I want this? If I'm imagining something for somebody else I don't want, then that's when I'm crossing the line and it's going to come back to me. I was wondering to get your feedback first on two parts of that. Can I imagine for someone else without actually talking to them? And secondly, is that an interesting test? Can I imagine something I would want for myself? Is that a good way to test it in the moment? Of course, every situation is going to be different. I'm just kind of trying to get at what his discussion was.
Yeah, well, he's obviously brilliant and enlightened. Okay, so we can absolutely imagine a quote unquote best case scenario for someone that my issue, and it's not even an issue, it still becomes personalized. And so I try to stay away from personhood.
Okay.
So I try to, and Neville doesn't need advice from anybody, but I try to stay away from personhood. So how I approach things is that I do work on myself to awaken oneself and become self-realized. And then that your mirror I am presence, wherever you are, is actually emanating such a high frequency that they're getting a whiff of their own self-realization reflected back to them. And to me, that's the greatest service that we could ever do, is to provide a mirror reflection of someone's own liberation and self-realization. So that's my approach. It's not the only way, obviously, but that is my approach. And that's how I've approached not just this incarnation as RJ. That is the deeper mindset of the higher mind of my higher self, is to be the embodiment of and then not talk the talk, walk the walk. And then people who are desirous of transcendence and transmutation, they'll get a whiff of you, whether it's just by looking into your eyes or they'll read a book you wrote or whatever. If they're desirous of that, they're going to have that reflection back to them, and then the rest is up to them.
And that's what I love about what we do, because if what I'm offering can be of service, can help someone out, which is what I desperately want more than anything, they're going to end up in my energy field. They're going to be watching this show. They're going to buy my book. They're going to listen to my podcast. I'm not forcing it on them. I end up in their field naturally. And I've never wanted to, hey, you need to know this. These are the things you need to know when I walk up to somebody. So I'm sure I don't know if this is a side thought, but because of this crazy stuff that we talk about, it's so funny. Like, I'll be sitting with my wife and my son-in-law, and I'll suddenly start talking about some of the crazy stuff that we talk about. Aliens and Maldek and asteroids and higher consciousness. And sometimes it sounds crazy, some of the stuff we're talking about. And so I want people to enter into my conversation when it's natural and it seems natural. I don't ever want to force it on them, because when I hear myself outside of my body talking to somebody that doesn't know what I'm talking about, I can sound insane. Like, I don't want that. I want somebody to enter into my field when they're ready. And I think that's the best way, right?
I think people only enter into your field when they're ready.
Yeah.
I think that's actually I don't think you ever have to think about it, Brian. I think it only happens when they are ready. And because we're the embodiment, or the person is the embodiment of what it is that they quote unquote teach, then it's just your mere presence is actually having this effect on them. And if they like it, they'll actually ask you. They'll actually come up to you. They'll read the book. They'll watch the podcast. They'll take a class, whatever. They'll start to partake of it. So for me, it is always about the only people that come into my field are the people that are meant to come into my field. I don't ever reach out. This whole thing about, hey, I'm enlightened, let me knock on your door and tell you all this. So who the hell are you? Right? I would never do that.
Right.
Now, instead, what I do is I keep expressing myself with the capital S. I keep expressing myself, my depth of love and wisdom, whose subsets are my talents and abilities. So I'm not going to stop expressing myself, either through having great conversations, writing books, workshop, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep doing that. And the right people, those that are desirous of transformation and transcendence, are going to get a whiff of that. And then it's up to them. If they truly want change, it's now in their field of vision. Now, at that point, it's up to them to take action.
So I like to put these ideas out there into the general consciousness so that people can start to think about this stuff, and then it can become real. So let's together imagine a world where everyone is entered into this super consciousness, because it's really fun and exciting to think about. because it's possible. It's happening all over the universe. There are planets right now that are just thriving vibrantly, where everyone on it is totally super conscious. Tell me what your vision is, what it would be like if we were, just to get, because we're just like 0.001% have really started to even taste super conscious. We're all babies here on this planet, right?
I do. So when I incarnate, the majority of my incarnations are as a human being. Certainly not all of them, but the majority of them, 181, are human.
Okay.
To be specific, are human. So I have a deep, deep affinity and love for humanity. So really everything I do, every time I'm here, is to bring about what you just said. Now, what is it like? I mean, it's happened many times already. It's happened many times. So we're just in this cycle. And I always just use a flower, right? So a flower starts up, there's nothing there, starts to come up, and then it starts to bloom, 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 and then it fully blooms, right? And then what happens after that? The same thing starts to happen. It starts to collapse, it starts to die, and it goes back down. It's just cyclical. We have done this many times. We're going to keep doing it. I'm not going to say many more times because it's not quite the same as it was before. We're doing it faster. We're doing it faster each time because we're getting so good at it. So it's not that far off where our version of Earth that you and I are on, where this actually starts to take place when we're living like this. Now, I think where the big misconception or misunderstanding is that it's not this version of Earth where this is going to happen. So what does that mean? Okay, so Earth is a living conscious being, but Earth exists as a pan-frequential being. Which does that mean? It means that Earth exists in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th frequency. So Earth exists in all these frequencies. It's not the ascension of Earth. When I hear that, I'm like, that's not what's going on. Earth already exists in higher planes. It's a matter of the consciousness moving into, and that's what this book is about: disorder to order, greed to generosity. That's what this is about. It's like, how do we move through this? So we are going to be moving through this, and then we are going to be on a different version of Earth that is vibrating in a higher frequency, because we will be vibrating in a higher frequency when we work with ourselves in a more holistic understanding. What does it look like? Here's what I can tell you about when we are truly living like that. I can tell you this for a fact: I won't be here anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. I won't be here anymore. And
your job is done.
That's absolutely done. And everything that I'm going to do as RJ, and have done before and will continue to do, is to bring about the full blessing, the full blooming. So what it looks like, it looks like a job well done.
When my higher self is talkative, which isn't all the time, I wish it was. So when my higher self is talkative, it or he says, maybe in 20 to 300 years is probably an accepted time frame that we can, when we're looking at what's happening. Could be sooner, and there's probability ranges, but generally it's gonna happen. There's really no doubt about it in that time frame. It's just a matter of how it happens. There might be some growing pains, the lashing of the dragon's tail a little bit, right, as he dies.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of how I feel it. And what's your vibe on that? Paul Selig, I think when he's channeling, his guide said something similar. So
yeah, that without question. And I've said this before, that the teachings that I'm going to leave here are going to be the foundational teachings of what humanity uses for the next 300 years to take them to the next frequency. So I have exact same number, about 300 years. It's exactly, and the key is that it's experiential. I know I keep saying that. It's not about just mentally understanding. That doesn't do anything for anybody. Everyone listening, understand. Mentally understanding anything is worthless. You're not your thoughts. It's only the tangible felt sense recognition of more of the I am. That's evolution. That's the change. Understanding different things is moving around furniture in the same room. It doesn't make a bit of difference. It's you accessing more of who and what you really are, more of your higher mind, more of your higher self, more of the higher mind of the higher self. And so, yeah, I get almost exactly 300 years is when we're going to see this planet. There's nothing similar in the way that we're operating, in the way that we're going to be operating in 300 years.
I'm so excited. I know I'm going to be there, at least just to take a couple pictures, right?
Yeah.
But I'm excited for that. And there's a part of me that wants it sooner, wants to taste and share it, that knows that, it's unlikely, but maybe I can do anything in my power. A lot of times that's what I'm putting podcasts out. I'm doing stuff. If I can just tweak it a little bit, I can just open up this idea. If I can just give this one little thing, that we can start opening ourselves up. One of the things that you talk about is limitation to limitless, maybe one of the more important chapters. And it's going to be an important chapter for all of us, because right now we're in a consciousness of limitation. And that sounds cliche. When I recommend everybody read that chapter, but I think that's going to be the big one. When we grasp and accept our limitlessness, and people can say that a million podcasts. This is more important than you think. Because when we really embrace within our own consciousness that anything is possible and there is really no limit to what we can do or experience, amazing things will start to happen when we transcend, when we go beyond that duality.
100%. It's all, I like to say, it's all one thing. There's no locks and bolts to anything. Anything that you desire is already given. It's already within you. It's already there. There are absolutely, like, as you were saying, people think it's a slogan. It's not. It's not. There's no such thing as impossible. There are beings that keep showing up here and doing the impossible over and over again. Well, why is that? Because nothing's impossible. That's why. Now, all prisons, all limitations are self-imposed, because they aren't really there. We have to create them. They don't authentically or intrinsically, they're not part of what is. The limitation is a creation. It's not really there. I've searched the multiverse and beyond. There's no such thing as an actual limitation. We create them. As a limitless creator being, we even create our own limitations. Now, when we start to work with ourselves in the way that the books teach and show, that we will actually realize that there is literally no limitation whatsoever. We're all a fractal of God. And last I checked, God doesn't have any limitations. Neither do we. Our reality is created solely based upon what we believe to be real and true. And that's it. That's it. So if you know inside that you are this limitless wavelength of sentient energy that has absolutely no limitations, then you'll actually create a life that's representative of actually having absolutely no limitations. Unparalyzing yourself and doing all these different things. Everyone will do it. Everyone will do it. It's like the 4-minute mile. We talked about that a long time ago in an interview. 4-minute mile. No one can run a 4-minute mile. It's impossible. It's humanly impossible. Don't even bother trying. No one's ever done it. Never going to happen. Roger Bannister, whatever year that was, Roger Bannister does it, right? 6 weeks later, someone else does it. And then since then, 20,000 people have done it, including high school students. Why? Because once it's downloaded into the collective consciousness, it gives everyone else a permission slip to do the impossible for themselves, because there's no such thing as impossible. So all it takes is us to start to break free of our own self-imposed limitations, which are only in your finite mind. And one way to know for a fact that you're not those limitations is that you're aware of the limitations. If you were the limitations, you wouldn't be aware of the limitations that you're stating to yourself. You're the unsullied, untainted, unlimited awareness of the limitation that you're conjuring up in your head in order to summon your own suffering. Now, when we start to work with ourselves differently, that never happens again. And eventually this entire planet is going to operate just like that.
So I wanted to ask about chapter 13, where you talk about desire to stillness, because a lot of those chapters, you could look at the beginning concept to be sort of a negative to the positive, violence to kindness, resentment to forgiveness, desire to stillness. So the first when you just see the title of the chapter, the first instinct is to say, well, is desire bad? Is desire something that it is bad? You know, desire in many ways has inspired me. It guides me. It lets me know what I want to do. It pushes me. It motivates me. So explain your concept with that chapter of this dichotomy between desire and stillness.
Okay. So in esoteric or spiritual circles, we've all heard that desire is the enemy, right? It's having desire is what causes suffering. Okay, that's true and it's not. So desires born of personhood are what causes suffering because we're not a person. It desires of the expression to create from the mighty I am, from the true self, never causes suffering. It's simply the I am expressing itself. Desire is the first order of creation. Nothing happens, absolutely nothing. We'd all be sitting here singing Kumbaya, right? Nothing actually happens without desire. Desire, intention, thought, emotion, action, and behavior. Desire sets creation into motion. The key thing to understand about desire is that desire germane to who and what you really are, or is that desire coming from your conditioned egoic mind? That's what we have to understand about desire. Desire is not the enemy. It's understanding where it's coming from is the key in terms of desire.
And that makes more sense. There's just so many other cool things, so many other cool techniques. I recommend that everybody check out your amazing book, Access Superconsciousness. I have the link in the description, and make sure you get a copy. It's so exciting that you have another one coming out, and of course I'll have you on to talk about that one. And I feel like with these books, we've been taken through a classroom, and it's good to be moving into these higher levels, the higher classes, to learn more, to expand my consciousness. And I really appreciate you putting the words down and making the effort. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're most welcome, my friend. You're most welcome. It's my joy. It's my passion. It's my love. It's also my responsibility. There's nothing I'd rather do than do exactly what I'm doing right now.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to the Reality Revolution. We'll talk to you soon.
We return you now to your local announcement.